Hello everyone and welcome to this episode, the workplace learning one, of the Women Talking About Learning podcast. I'm Andrew Jacobs. It's strange it's taken so long to get to this topic. We guess that most of our audience probably work in this space, but we've only just got around to this subject. We are, however, privileged to have three outstanding women to share their insights on the unique challenges and opportunities that women face and the strategies that they have adopted. Our first guest is Ruth Buckley. Ruth is the forensic consultant for crime scene examination for the Metropolitan Police Service. Previously an archaeologist, she has spent the last 3 decades reconstructing past events through scene interpretation and the recovery of trace evidence. As the lead for this discipline, Ruth is keen to find ways to develop the scene examiners of the future through innovation and technology as a way to complement traditional established approaches. Our second guest is Lisa Burke. Lisa commenced her career with the Met Police as a trainee in fingerprint identification, moved into crime scene examination, and then progressed into professional development for forensic staff. Lisa now manages training, recruitment and innovation within forensics, supporting a department of over 1,200 people, developing the skills, knowledge, future technologies and techniques to keep pace within the challenges of policing in London. Our final guest is Dr. Carrie Graham. Carrie has a reputation of understanding stated and unstated problems, and then asking critical questions to help uncover clear and actionable solutions. Not believing in the one-size-fits-all approach, she customises learning solutions to support complex individual and organisational learning needs. Recorded in early June 2024, this is a superb episode which looks at learning as a whole and, as always, is an essential listen. This is Women Talking About Learning. This is Ruth, Lisa and Carrie talking about workplace learning.
Hi Carrie, it's nice to see you. So what's brought you here today?
Hi. Hello, Ruth. I am really excited about having a conversation with other wonderful women, such as yourself, about learning and learning, in particular, learning in the workplace. But before I move forward, I want to say hello to Lisa. Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Carrie. Hi, Ruth. Thank you for the introduction to this really interesting podcast for me. I mean, I've spent a lot of years working in learning sort of indirectly as part of what I do within forensics in the police service, and found it a really interesting perspective coming from a side where for us it's we do technical work, but we also do some of those line management leadership skills, and so I'm interested to see what it looks like in other worlds and find everybody else's experiences. So I'll go to Ruth then. Ruth, you're one of my colleagues, but I'm sure Carrie would want to know more about you.
So one of the reasons, like Lisa, I've worked in policing a while, but I've worked also in academia and teaching. And I think one of the things when I started delivering training and teaching within the Met was actually I learned that I was much better giving evidence at court and doing different aspects of my role, which was a really unexpected consequence. And so actually one of the reasons I'm always trying to encourage people into engaging in some of these activities is actually it made me a much better expert talking about evidence types and my profession and how I understand it. And because if you have to deliver it and teach and help everybody from different backgrounds to understand it, it gives you a completely different delivery. So that's one of the reasons that I have become more interested in looking at different ways to undertake activities to bring people from different roles, different backgrounds, different ages to do their roles in a different way, in a better way.
That is so interesting, Ruth and Lisa, to know that the two of you are using learning in the workplace, like in the role and in the industry that you both are in. I had never thought of it from that capacity, Ruth, as you were mentioning, when you're giving evidence and testimony and things like that, and in forensics, because my initial background is in healthcare. And then I went into the academy and was teaching, and then on to consulting. And you're right, there are these intricacies that you learn and skills that you learn in your industry job, but it translates across so many other aspects of the work that you do, that we all do, which is really, I think it's cool. It's so interesting to hear that that's the perspective you both bring.
I think for me, Gary, one of the interesting bits in our role is I say the variety of what you have to deliver in teaching and learning for the people that you work with. For us, for any one week, we could have a really practical course where we've got people literally on their hands and knees looking for things and recovering evidence. To the next day, you're doing those more complex scientific theories and methodologies that they've got to understand, through to the next week it's leadership and how to manage a team, or there may be things about diversity and inclusion they've got to do. We sort of generally encompass everything as part of what we do, because they have to be quite rounded individuals. So that's always a challenge, I think, in the workplace where we've got a team of people that cover so many disciplines and so many areas, I think.
Yeah, so we're always trying to find new ways to cover some of these topics. Some of them are foundation topics, but also looking at how we want to use authentic practitioners, so people who are undertaking that role, who can explain it. I suppose when I was younger, I thought if I explained something in a more complex way, it sounded really credible. But actually, being able to explain something simply to anybody and get a variety of different people to understand what you're trying to explain and the context of it is absolutely critical. So for us, I think looking at as my background is a scene examiner, so you have lots of tacit skills things that you don't even realize, processes that you undertake when you're doing your job. And actually, so trying to identify why someone is good at a job, and then how do you teach that? How do you enhance and develop those tacit skills? So that's why we try to find these different ways to address some of those challenges. And quite often it might be place something on a wall and explain to somebody where it is and locate it, or it could be something much more exploratory, where, as Lisa says, you're undertaking a search activity and considering the context, the environment, the implications, and so on. But those different activities and deliveries really makes it interesting, doesn't it, Lisa? Especially when you see how people grasp it and actually some of the gems that they come out with afterwards.
Yeah, one of the things that I always find interesting is we get a lot of people with varied qualifications that come into us, join the organisation. Some of them not graduates, and just have basic skills, and through to those with PhDs. And they all go through the same training regardless of the background, because we have to sort of set that benchmark in terms of activity. And actually, we find they all learn something from that process, regardless of where they've come in terms of academic qualifications or experience. They're all going through that journey together and all experiencing some of those, that learning in those environments. They come out much more rounded as practitioners in some of those technical areas.
Absolutely. That's really interesting. Ruth, you mentioned the tacit learning piece. As a healthcare provider, that was, I found to be such a challenge when I started healthcare education, right? So I had been a clinician for years, and then to transition into an educator role and trying to help young individuals, aspiring healthcare providers, how did I know what decisions to make in working with a patient? And it's much to your point, a lot of times it is using a simple approach to helping them understand, and even that act of explaining something more simply, I have found over the years, I'm curious what you two think, I've found over the years that that then becomes a learning opportunity for myself as well, because it's, what the language that I used for one person, say a year ago, and now I'm working with someone else who is in a different industry and I'm trying to use the same language. No, I'm still using simple words, but the context must change in order for me to support them. And I found that it challenges me, which I'm always up for that level of learning, especially like in the work that I do. So for me, it becomes my workplace learning.
Yeah, I find that's really interesting, by the way, Carrie. I find that one of the skills that you have to have is to be able to go into different environments, meet different people. And for us, we might be working and training and teaching people from a real range of a new entry recruit, or it could be a senior leader, one of our senior leaders sitting in the audience, and you think, goodness, how am I explaining this to him? They know everything. But it's fascinating because you literally learn all the time, and that's a real joy. The uncertainty, one of the things that drew me in this sort of work was I always liked that every day was different, and so actually embracing that uncertainty and that it's continual improvement. Lisa and I both work in innovation and continual improvement, so that you can always look at doing something differently and better. And actually, when I was teaching in academia, one really amazing finding I had was from a student who didn't have the best outcomes, but actually came up with some really interesting different ways of looking at it that I never would have looked at it before. And you think actually it really changed my approach on how I deal with some things now, because their different perspective allowed them the distance from it to go, well, why don't we do it differently?
Yeah.
So it's so valuable.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's absolutely incredible. I'm always interested and curious what for women in particular, what that experience is like early on in your career. And I mean, I've been doing my work for almost 30 years. And so I'm always curious, Lisa, what early days, right? Like as you are making the transition from you're making the transition into the learning space. What was your experience like?
It was interesting for me. I'm also probably close to 30 years now in terms of my career at this point. And I had to come from an environment where I was the person being trained, and a very traditional, teach, listen approach, and not interactive. And for me, it was quite difficult to grasp some of the concepts unless I could sort of, think them through properly. And the one thing that I was allowed was a lot of freedom to, when I went into the learning environment, was to develop the programs in a manner that would suit different learning styles and would have suited someone like myself more. Because I learned from experience. I learned from the full understanding of the process, and rather than just being told everything. So being given that freedom, we were able to start using much more blended approach in terms of learning, and much more, okay, let's get away from our desks, let's get into the room, let's go and look around, let's put on the clothes that you need to do so you get to experience the environment as you would, or get down on your hands and knees, as I've said before, and look for the things that you're supposed to do. And I remember one particular occasion that we had specific rooms set up as scene rooms, and many of us had quite a bit of experience at that time of going to crime scenes and seeing various things. And we've gone into these training environments and said, these are ridiculous. They don't look like a home. They don't, literally what's happened is they've crammed as much things in there as possible. what we're going to do is we're going to strip everything out. We're going to start again. We're going to make it start to look like a home environment, so that the person coming in there to experience that could, they could see it, they could identify with that, they could go through that process and think to themselves, yes, I know I'm in a classroom probably, but I can start to grasp that. And begin that freedom by the people that were in charge of us at the time was brilliant, because what we saw then was a much better response from the people who were training. And they were much more engaged in the environment and what was taking place. And they were, they were much more successful as an outcome. And there was definitely an improvement in the quality as we went through. And I know, Ruth, you've been part of this as well, and probably was part of the group that we trained us into that new style. Did you think that there's been improvements? And probably, I think, in with your work as well, there's been improvements even since then in terms of the way we deliver training.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. I probably was in one of those cohorts of really transformed learning environments and looking at things differently. And I think from my perspective, I've learned more about how I learn since I've had children, actually, and seeing some of the challenges they have. And I think, oh, that makes sense, because I approach things in that way too. And so I like to get up, move around, have short periods, have change. And so some of that ability to do activities where you work independently in a group, going from a scene, reflecting on that learning and how it feeds into, in our instance, we look at data and into an inquiry. That was really, really interesting. And I think there have been certainly some improvements. I mean, we're looking at now trying to find ways of addressing challenges, I imagine, like everybody is in the workplace, where your resources, environments, they're more challenging. And so some of the things that we have been looking at is how can we maximize those face-to-face opportunities that are absolutely crucial and provide other really meaningful activities. So we've been looking at virtual reality, simulated environments, and trying to find some interdisciplinary options where, we could look at drawing practice from another discipline, another area, to, again, as Lisa says, to make that training as realistic and teaching as possible, so that, because we want people to be agile, confident, strong, resilient practitioners. And so giving them an environment to learn in, which is, I know everyone would say safe, but also allows them the opportunity to see things, practice, reflect, repeat, is really critical. And so trying to find ways that we can, I suppose, address the challenges, but actually some of the changes that we will make because of those challenges might really transform our learning further. So it's interesting. And the other thing I was thinking, actually, when Lisa was speaking, is you don't realize, as somebody delivering these inputs, if I think back to when I started, you remember those individuals that delivered that training, whether that was at school, university, in employment, they really stand out. And so actually the impact that you can have on anybody in their direction, I mean, for us, we still see people we've trained 20 years later. We'll see them around the building, going out to scenes. You might see them on television, in the news. So it is quite incredible and rewarding when you see that we have that living legacy almost. And so when we probably got into those activities, didn't realize that would be the impact of it. So it's incredibly fulfilling, even though it might be someone that you taught 20 years ago.
Wow. That's really that's awesome. That's so interesting. One of the things that helps me make that leap in growth and evolution is, Ruth, you had mentioned having children, and for me, it's life. What stage of life am I in? And why, right? So not so much as why am I at this stage of life, but why are these things happening? Why do I have the view that I'm having now? or that of others, why are others having their perspectives, and using that lens to inform the approach that I take to teaching now. And my PhD is in adult learning, and that's one of the tenets, right, of adult learning is the recognizing and acknowledging, as well as leveraging the life experience of people. And every day, I find it to be really interesting when I'll ask someone, say in sales, well, why do you view it this way? And why are you thinking that your sales training must look in this particular way? And it oftentimes goes back to, well, this is the traditional way that things have been done, but they're ready, right? Those individuals that I work with are ready to, much like you were saying, Lisa, to scrap it and say, let's clean the room and let's start over with some new insights. So it's always the opportunity for growth, I think, is what's exciting. It's most exciting to me. So often I hear people talk about, they'll say, oh, I'm a lifelong learner. And I always think, well, I wonder what that means to them really. For some people it's learning hobbies, and, I look at it as, well, every day in my world is a learning opportunity, whether it's a new recipe that my husband wants me to try, or it's how to navigate London on my first time visit. So it's, learning happens on a regular basis.
I was thinking when you were talking about every day as a learning experience, I mean, I think the opportunity, we have people who work remotely across London and in different roles, in earlies, lates and night duties. It's challenging. And so the opportunity to create, I say product, but learning modules or learning opportunities that allow us to better understand those different roles, how they connect to each other, how those members of our teams from the different communities in London and surrounding London and so on. It's really interesting because there are aspects that I would never have considered, whether it's thinking about our members of staff and their paths into working in policing, their own life experiences, like you say, how we change as we get older. There are things that when people say working in the areas that we do, it must be really difficult. Things that bothered me when I was younger do not bother me now, and vice versa. Things that I now, because obviously I have children, and so some of those activities, people's expectations of what they're going to have in the workplace, how long they're going to be there. And I suppose we've had to really move with that, haven't we? Because there's so many different inputs available online, in books, fantastic webinars and podcasts. So we try to maximize people's opportunity to engage in those, and equally then try to, I think, if you have some of those opportunities, you can then move to the next level of learning, can't you? To really understand, evaluate, and apply it.
Yeah, it's interesting, Ruth, that you talk about those different sort of sources of learning that's available for them. And, we have traditionally come from a point where people expected to be trained, expected to be taught, and, and it came at particular stages in their career. But I think over certainly the last few years, with that wealth of opportunity of different sources of information, there has been a more proactive approach from most staff around self-directed learning and seeking opportunities. And we've been fortunate in the organisation that they've brought in opportunities for you to seek self-directed learning, and we try and share any content. And overall, there's been more from the community, especially probably from the pandemic onwards, to be honest, because of the proliferation of Microsoft Teams and Zoom calls, etc., that people are used to the webinar activity that you're used to, a short lunch and learn session that covers a topic that they may never have thought about before, but gives them an opportunity to expand in a different way. And I think that that can't be anything bad about that at all, in terms of encouraging more people to think in that learning sort of mindset every day. And like you said, Carrie, about, is it just learning about a new menu or a new meal to make for yourself or your husband, or is it for me when I was during the pandemic to do an art class just to learn a new skill? I think if there's one probably positive that came out of the pandemic, it might have been that availability and more focus by an individual on learning for themselves.
Yeah, that's such an interesting point. And as we talk about workplace learning and the expectations around it, my research was on the workplace learning experiences of women in a particular industry. I won't say what that industry is, but in a particular industry. And in doing the research, one of the things that I found is the common thread across these women was they would always say, they consistently said that their organizations promoted accessing workplace learning opportunities. However, in their roles, they recognized they didn't have access as women. For example, one of the women, in order to access or to be granted the ability to participate in a self-directed learning experience, you had to be recommended by a mentor, an in-house mentor. And she didn't have an in-house mentor. Her male colleagues did, but she didn't. Another woman identified that the classification of her job, even though she was doing work that was consistent with others and was highly productive, she didn't have the access to the opportunities that she wanted to take advantage of because of the classification of her title. And we dug more deeply into that. But, that's one of the things that I always think is interesting when we talk about workplace learning, and women in particular, is, well, who, and underrepresented individuals, is who actually has access. So I think so much, especially during the pandemic and post-pandemic, there's this great movement of the needle and investment in learning opportunities within organizations. But I oftentimes go back to who has access to it. What is the quality of it, right? Like I am an advocate of a lunch and learn, but how is that lunch and learn structured? What are the topics? Do the topics support the people that want to attend it? It's one thing if it's a topic that, you're unfamiliar with, but if you're really working to expand and build your career and your skill set, are these topics that actually fit and support you in that? So that's, one of when we think about the question of, do people have different expectations about workplace learning? It's one of the things that I always go back to is that research.
There was so much that was really insightful, Carrie. I mean, there was so much I was listening to in your comments there, and I was thinking, on the one hand, people had said to me in the past, do you have a mentor? Have I ever got a mentor? And I said, no, I've never had a mentor. I mean, there are people I look up to who have inspired me, who I aspire to be like, but I haven't had a mentor. And I thought about it and thought, actually, if I never thought to ask to have a mentor, but I remember saying to Lisa, have you got a mentor? It was almost like a secret, really, but actually that it didn't even occur to me to ask. So having been fortunate, I've worked very hard to get where I am, but having been fortunate to get where I am, I now make a huge effort to talk to people and to say, well, have you considered a mentor, explain the options? Because actually sometimes just encouraging someone to start on a path is what they need. I know for myself, especially when you've got the challenges of life outside of work, because it's changes, you've got childcare, caring responsibilities, family responsibilities, your own health. Sometimes having someone to even encourage you to start the path is one thing. And in terms of, like we were saying about the access to that learning, having been the shift worker, quite often you weren't always feeling that you could. You know yourself, you've worked in healthcare. You don't always feel that you can access that 1 till 2 opportunity, which doesn't allow you to attend because you're working somewhere else or you're working a late shift and so on. And so having that understanding, I think, about, okay, with the pandemic, as Lisa said, we now record things. If I'm trying to have a meeting with somebody who is one of those shift workers, I try and be a bit more flexible to go, okay, I could meet you at 7 till 8, or we don't have to have everything at the same time. And exactly as you say, because how do you encourage to make sure the topics that are covered are relevant to everybody, and that everybody has that voice to say, as opposed to just that organizer, this is what I want to discuss, this is what we're going to do, to say, okay, let's have an equitable opportunity for learning where everybody can contribute to the topic and the direction of it. I mean, obviously, as you say, there has to be some quality control in there to say, is it relevant? Should we be including this? But realistically, it's got to be shared. And I think when you get that investment from people, it pays back dividends, doesn't it?
Do you think it's worth exploring those barriers to those opportunities around things like mentoring and seeing, what we can do to tackle that? I mean, hopefully, I'm quite clear in our organisation, those opportunities are available for people. But, generally in the workplace, is that, a lived experience by women that they can't get access to these things? And, what is that? Like we were saying before, is that down to your social setting and in your current situation? Or is that the barrier put up by the workplace? Or the mechanism isn't there for them to do it, and that would be a dreadful shame in this day and age for that to be the experience. But obviously, Carrie, you're saying that still exists, which is
yeah. It does, and that's such a great question, because it's where do we put the focus to move the needle? Right. So if we look at any one organization, I don't believe that we can say the shift in how learning is viewed at work rests at the desk of the employer organization, nor do I think you can say it rests at the executive, right? So whoever is leading that organization. But I also can't say you have to put it at the feet of add it to the list of to-do things for those individuals, those women, those underrepresented individuals that want those opportunities. It really becomes a holistic approach, in my opinion. And within that, there are different areas, right? So for women of color, it's the advocating to be present. There were some in the research that I did, these women had incredible insights and recommendations, right? So there's that from a self-care and self-directedness perspective. But then it also becomes this from an executive leadership perspective of, well, what is included in leadership development and executive leadership development? Is there this understanding of equitable access within the organization? Is that part of their level of training? And then from an organizational perspective, I would say, well, where does our organization stand from a social justice perspective? Because that then becomes an outward facing opportunity for learning. And so I think it's, well, I know it's a very complex approach to learning. I don't think there's an easy answer to that. However, I'm always hopeful. I'm always hopeful that that change can be made as we all move forward.
Yeah, I think something that I have come to appreciate more with my service is actually the value for workplace learning, that we have it, and that I have an employer who actively encourages having courses that are available on an early shift and on a late shift as well. There are different options available. From my own perspective, I was just going to say the other thing that I think that is real value. So one, people need we need to speak more about some of those experiences. And so actually now me actively encouraging people to have mentors, I might have thought, well, I'm not sure I'm doing okay. I'm not sure I need one, or why would I get one? And actually you should say, well, I'd like some help. Could you help me? That in itself takes a bit of courage, doesn't it? And in terms of workplace learning, if I think about some of the value that I have had from, I am so grateful for my employer in that we have emergency life support training, and it's a regular training course that we undertake. And sometimes courses that you have to do every single year, it is hard, isn't it? You think, I've got a really busy schedule and I need to do this. But actually for myself, it was so valuable because my son had a horrific accident and I had to do emergency life support. And, it really changed his prognosis. It took me a really long time to get over that accident. But actually, I truly was so grateful to my employer that I had that opportunity, because that made a massive difference. It truly, if I hadn't have had that training and that learning, and then the learning afterwards of how to process what happened, how to talk to people about what happened, that made that for everybody has improved outcomes. And so actually being able to talk to other people, especially when you're dealing with some of our peers dealing with trauma, to be able to articulate it again, one, it helps me process it, but also to say, this is the value of this learning. This is how it makes a difference. It might make a difference to your home, to your family, to your community. No, it's not just about work. It's about developing you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I love it.
Sorry, I got a bit personal there, so I apologize. But I have to say, I was so grateful because once I had gotten over what had happened, I emailed our commissioner and said thank you, because I don't think I appreciated it until that moment when I truly needed it. And so having that opportunity to have an employer that gives me that is terrific.
Yeah, and we're not independent of our work. As much as I think we like to think or try to separate the two, our professional and personal work lives, we can't. We can't. They do coexist. Lisa, I'm curious. What are your thoughts on what Ruth is sharing?
Yeah, I mean, I was aware of Ruth's experience on this, and it's funny. I previously had gone through this training, and having that capacity to take that experience within the workplace and then utilize it elsewhere, it does embed the value of the learning that you get. I similarly have done learning within the workplace on mental health support and around mental health first aid. And I saw that as a skill that wasn't solely for my workplace. I thought it was, to recognize those signs outside, to see individuals that were experiencing crisis at some point. It wasn't something that I would just, narrow down for just being when I was 9 to 5 in the office and do that. And so it was valuable to me. And I think this is the thing about, probably it's a female experience in being part of this, or probably more general, but I feel all those lived experience in terms of learning has developed me as an individual, inside and outside. be it the team building exercises as a part of that training, be it just the concentration on some of the more technical things, or be it those skill sets in, emergency life saving or mental health support. And I think one of the questions to consider is whether that experience as a female has been different, and what women should take from workplace learning is it gives you growth, and growth is so important overall. I'm just sort of interested, I suppose, for yourselves as women in the workplace, what advice you would give to other women about workplace learning.
Wow, that's such a good question. I think, one of the things that stands out for me is it's okay to ask in the first instance, and to if someone doesn't say there is a reason I can't make that, or I can't achieve that, or it's going to take me longer to do that piece of work, to do the background reading I need for the learning. If that isn't shared, we will never get the best from that individual. So we need to get the best from the individual for them to learn. So they need to speak up. And equally, we all need to, I think it's really important that everybody engages in these opportunities to teach, to learn, to listen, to reflect, to share. And that output, really, I keep saying, we need to have a research, a communication of our strategy, of our outputs, because actually there's enormous reach there, that it's not just about what's happening here, it's much broader than that, isn't it? And so we need to speak up, to say where it's going to be a challenge, and then also to engage. I, in the past, would have really shied away from doing something like this, or from speaking up as a female, as a leader, as a person. But actually you realize it's so important that you do, because it might be the reason somebody else starts a job, remains in the job, encourages other people, encourages the community of people around them to do this, and to have the confidence to do that. Carrie, how about you?
I would say my advice, it is a great question. My advice actually starts before you get hired. I would say for women, as an African American woman, particular, my heart is always for young women that look like me, Black and brown. And I would say, as you are on the journey of looking for whether it's your first job or your next job, be clear. First and foremost, be clear about what's important for you and your own personal growth, professionally, and your personal evolution. And then as you are looking at organizations to apply or to join, make sure that they have some levels of learning opportunity and learning experiences there that are aligned and that support you. And I the comment was made earlier that we are not separate, right, from our work, right? Our personal lives and our work lives are closely connected. And so why not place yourself in an environment where learning is advocated, and so when it's advocated, opportunities are presented at different times of day and they're recorded. But I think that in addition to what you offered, Ruth, I think it's so important that we do some self-reflection first. Look at those things that we are good at and things that we're not good at, and at the secret places in our hearts as women where we want to go and aspire, and position ourselves in an environment that will in fact support it, or at least provide opportunities where we can be supported.
We're really lucky. In our team, we have such a high number of women in our organisation. So I feel like we are we're very lucky, very privileged, and actually actively encouraging people from different backgrounds to come and work with us. We've currently had a group of gap year students who have been working with us, and Lisa and I both saying actually during the interview process it was amazing to meet them, to speak to people, and to think, goodness, they are so articulate, accomplished, interesting, brave, and that was a real delight to see that, and to see people and think, gosh, I really hope they come and work with us, we see them again. And so some of those activities, you think they may go on, they might come work with us, they might go somewhere else, but they will go and take this positive experience and take it somewhere else, whether that's going back to university, to their families, their friends. And it's fantastic. And so seeing the difference it makes, for myself, until I'm never going to have the same experience as somebody else. I'm never going to have your experience, Carrie, because we're all completely different, aren't we? But it wasn't until the pandemic and I was getting the train into London, and there were times when I was coming in to work around the hours of shifts, and I thought, goodness, I'm the only female on the train. It was something I'd never experienced, and suddenly I felt really exposed. I didn't feel scared. I'd never noticed it before, because I think that the difference was in those times there might have been people who were at home as opposed to in the workplace, and so it really made me think in future. It really exposed me to how it must feel to be more of a minority in our workplace. So at least looking at that, as you're saying, and reflecting on that allows us to improve and at least see something slightly differently than I never did previously.
One of the things I've quite welcomed in the last few years is, for a lot of time I received learning and took it on, and then I directed learning. But now I'm getting involved with, hopefully inspiring the next generation to think about learning and think about careers and opportunities. And like Ruth mentioned before about those interactions with these people that you train early on, I'm having it now where I'm having people that I've gone out to other organisations, schools and universities, and spoken to them, and I see them a few years later and they'll say, do you remember when you spoke to us and told us about this, or you showed us this and we thought it was really interesting? And that for me is completely heartwarming, because now I'm, to be able to think, not only have I taken all the experiences on and from my career, and I've been able to be unfortunate and trained and learn and deliver that, I'm now going out and extending it further than that. And hopefully the next generation comes along with the same enthusiasm and the same look for the opportunities available for them. It's real. Yeah, it's one of those things that makes me smile coming into the work and to do those sort of things.
Yeah, that's awesome. Andrew put in our chat, it's so important to create and be role models. And I agree. I 100% agree with that. I didn't realize I was a role model until recently. And that was a great learning opportunity for me, to sit and be reflective of what does that mean for me, right? Like, what does that mean for me to be a role model? And how am I supporting others in a way that helps them grow? Because at the end of the day, I think that's really learning does. What I don't want to say only what learning does, but it's such a great way for us all to learn and for us all to grow is to participate in learning. And one of the ways to do that is through role modeling and mentorship and quite frankly, having conversations like this. I have to say, like, I felt like I was getting a little not soft, but emotional there. So I just want to bring a little levity and say, Lisa, you mentioned your background in forensics. I never would have put the two together, right? Forensics and learning, but I get it. I love it. And then to know that you and Ruth work together in law enforcement, I think that's the beauty of learning and the beauty of workplace learning, because it transcends all industries. It's needed in all industries, and it can be so powerful.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. We've been looking, I'm not going to start a new topic, but I have to say we've been looking at drawing learning from paramedic science, from healthcare, from clinical medicine, just different approaches to how you tackle some incidents. And it's so valuable. So like you say, it doesn't matter some of the products that we might look at creating in the future. I would want them to be available to somebody anywhere in the country. It's not about geography. It's not about discipline. It should be available and learning. And whether it's policing, ambulance, it could be teachers, schools, outreach activities, communities, and so on. So as you say, it's completely agnostic. These products, they should just be accessible, so that we can learn together. And those role models, I mean, honestly, those are people that even now I think we would all look off and think, I can remember people who were absolutely influential legacy role models in my life, my career. And so I think a thing that I am trying to learn how to do is, if someone gives me a compliment, say thank you, as opposed to say, oh no, it's nothing, it doesn't matter. That's a really difficult thing to do, is to accept someone saying you did a good thing, well done, or you are a role model and you should be really proud of yourself.
I found this conversation really interesting, and to be honest, I think I am surrounded by two role models as part of this conversation. So I was going to say thank you, Carrie. Really interesting insights from your experience, and Ruth. Well, I admire you in terms of the work that you do, and your experience, especially around the teaching and the academic element that you've come from, has been really valuable overall. So I just want to say thank you to you both.
Oh,
thank you, Lisa. Thanks, Carrie. It was lovely to meet you and lovely to talk to you. I would love to talk to you more, but I know that time is precious for everybody.
Absolutely. I agree, Lisa, and Ruth as well. I've so enjoyed our chat today, and it's truly been a blessing to me. And I look forward to hoping to have additional conversations with you both, preferably in your neck of the woods, as some people might say. I'm always up for another trip, but this was absolutely delightful. We have to thank Andrew so much for bringing us all together, because we are women talking about learning.
One of the joys for us is having guests from a range of sectors in the learning profession. And this is a perfect example of people who work in completely different areas coming together and sharing. There was so much to reflect on in this episode, and we'd love to know, what did you get from it? Let us know by mailing in or leaving a comment on LinkedIn or your podcast player. An enormous thank you to Ruth, Lisa and Carrie for their time and contributions. You will find all their details, as always, in the show notes, along with links we think that you'll appreciate. We know that some podcast players edit the notes down, so if you have trouble reading them, you can find them all on our website, womentalkingaboutlearning.com. We'll be back in 2 weeks, and next time it's the Improv in Training one. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.